Don't talk. Waitress saved Vampire King at restaurant after she caught something shocking. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. Mia had worked at the same upscale restaurant for over a year, barely scraping by. The glittering chandeliers and expensive decor, the laughter and clinking of glasses, felt so far out of her reach. She was just another waitress, her life dictated by tips and endless hours on her feet. On that particular evening, the restaurant was hosting a high-profile dinner, and Mia was tasked with serving table 7, a private booth tucked away in the corner. The booth was known for its exclusivity, often reserved for only the wealthiest and most influential people. Mia had seen plenty of famous faces pass through, but this evening, there was someone who stood out even more. At the head of the table sat a man who seemed to command the entire room without uttering a word. His dark, sharp features were framed by his perfectly tailored suit, and his cold, gray eyes flickered with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. He looked like someone who belonged in a different world entirely, perhaps a king or a CEO, someone who held power in his very presence. But Mia didn't know who he was. To her, he was just another customer to serve. She approached the table, her hands slightly trembling as she carried the drinks. As she set them down in front of the guests, her gaze briefly lingered on the man. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but she quickly dismissed it. Mia turned to leave, but just as she was about to walk away, a sharp, unsettling sound rang out from across the room. A subtle shift in the atmosphere caused her to pause. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and her instincts screamed that something was wrong. She turned back to the table, her eyes locking on the man. His face had gone pale, and his body was rigid with tension. Before she could even process what was happening, a figure in the shadows moved quickly toward him, a weapon in hand. Panic surged through Mia's chest. She knew she had to act fast. Without thinking, she rushed forward, sliding between the two men, just as the would-be assailant lunged. Mia's heart raced as she grabbed the arm of the attacker, pulling with all her might. The man grunted in surprise, but his grip tightened, and Mia felt herself being dragged backward. That was when she heard a low growl from the man at the head of the table. The Vampire King, as she would later learn, moved with inhuman speed. In the blink of an eye, he was on his feet, his piercing gaze locked on the attacker. With a force that seemed almost supernatural, he effortlessly threw the assailant to the ground, his grip tightening around the would-be murderer's throat. Mia watched in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. The man she had served just moments ago was no ordinary guest. He was something far more dangerous, and she had just saved his life. But why? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that the moment she had seen the danger, she couldn't just stand there. Her actions, though reckless, had just altered the course of her life in ways she couldn't yet understand. But as the Vampire King turned his gaze on her, his expression unreadable, Mia felt a sudden shiver run down her spine. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. I can't believe what just happened. The Vampire King stood before me, his eyes glowing in eerie amber as he gazed at the man he had just incapacitated. The would-be assailant was on the ground, motionless, his throat held firmly in the king's grip. I froze, unsure of what to do next, unsure of why I had stepped in to help him. He was a stranger, someone who didn't even seem like he needed help, but my instincts had driven me forward in the heat of the moment. Now, I was standing here, facing a man who clearly wasn't just an ordinary customer. He was powerful, dangerous, and somehow, I had just saved his life. The silence in the room was suffocating, every guest watching the scene unfold with bated breath. The king's grip loosened on the man's throat, and he slowly let the would-be attacker go. The man slumped to the floor, gasping for air, too terrified to make a sound. For a moment, everything was still. Then the king turned toward me. His cold gaze was enough to send a shiver down my spine. But he said nothing, just watched me with an intensity that felt like it could see straight through me. My heart raced. What had I done? Why had I intervened? His voice broke the silence, smooth and calculated, as he addressed me. Why did you do that? His tone was low, almost haunting, and it made my knees feel weak. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. I didn't want him to hurt you. I couldn't believe how simple that sounded. It felt like an excuse, something to justify my actions. But in truth, I didn't really know why I had stepped in. You didn't know who I am, he said, his voice still cold, though there was something almost amused in his eyes. I didn't know what to say. Of course, I didn't know who he was. He was just another guest to me, albeit one who looked like he could break someone in half with his bare hands. You're lucky, he continued, his gaze sharpening. Most people who get involved in my affairs don't walk away unscathed. My stomach twisted. I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. I didn't want anything from you, I said quickly, my voice trembling. I just couldn't stand by. The king stepped closer, his movements so fluid and effortless that it felt like he was gliding across the floor. His presence was overwhelming, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse under the weight of it. He stopped right in front of me, his eyes never leaving mine. You don't understand, he said softly, almost as though he was talking to himself. You've just changed everything. My mind raced. Changed everything? What did that mean? I barely knew him. I barely knew anything about this world that I had just stepped into. Who are you? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The king's expression didn't change, but his gaze softened for a split second, a fleeting moment that I almost missed. I am someone who has been around much. Longer than you can imagine, he replied. But you don't need to know that yet. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Who was this man? He didn't seem like just a businessman or some powerful CEO. There was something about him, something ancient, that sent an unsettling chill through me. But before I could ask another question, he turned to face the others in the room, dismissing them with a flick of his hand. Leave, he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that no one dared to question. One by one, the guests filed out of the room, leaving me alone with him. The doors clicked shut, and I felt the weight of his gaze on me again. You're not leaving, he said, turning back to me. Not yet. I have to go, I said, my voice shaking. My shift is over. I have to get home. He stepped closer, his presence more intimidating than ever. You'll stay here tonight, he said firmly, and you'll tell me everything. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I should argue or comply. What could I do? This man, this vampire king, had just saved my life, but in doing so, he had placed me in a situation I wasn't sure I could escape from. The tension in the room was thick. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as he looked at me with a gaze that was both commanding and curious. You saved me, he said, as though turning the statement over in his mind. Now I want to know why. The weight of his words hung in the air. There was no escape now. I was trapped in a world I didn't understand, with a man whose power and danger were only just beginning to reveal themselves. And for some reason, I didn't want to leave. Not yet. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. The vampire king's gaze was unyielding as it bore into me, his intense amber eyes like two burning coals. The room had emptied, leaving just the two of us in this quiet, tense space. The stillness felt almost suffocating. His earlier words still echoed in my head. You've just changed everything. I couldn't grasp what he meant, but I felt the weight of those words pressing down on me. He had saved my life, yet now? He held me in his power, and the thought of escaping crossed my mind. But something stopped me. Was it fear? Or curiosity? Maybe both. The king, still standing near the table, turned his head slightly, his eyes never leaving me. Sit, he commanded softly. I hesitated for a moment before obeying, pulling out a chair and sitting down at the long table. My heart was pounding in my chest. You're in my world now, he said, his voice low but carrying an edge of authority that I couldn't ignore. And in my world, things worked differently. I nodded, unsure of what he meant, but sensing that this was only the beginning of something I wasn't prepared for. He walked around the table, moving with a grace that seemed unnatural, his every step exuding power and control. The atmosphere in the room shifted as he approached me, and I felt a sudden chill, though the temperature remained the same. You acted without thinking, he said, stopping just in front of me. Most people would have frozen, but not you. You acted instinctively, without regard for your own safety. I swallowed, not knowing how to respond. I had acted without thinking. It was true. The moment I saw the danger, I had moved. And now, Here I was, sitting before a man who could very well end my life if he chose to. I don't know why I did it. I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I just couldn't let him hurt you. The king's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. That's what makes you different, he said. Most people see danger and run. But you ran towards it. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made me feel like he was reading my very thoughts. I couldn't help but shudder. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, he said. But there's no turning back now. I wanted to say something, anything, to defend myself or at least try to explain why I had acted as I did, but the words stuck in my throat. The king turned away, his back to me as he moved towards the window. He stared out into the night, the lights of the city below twinkling like stars. For a moment, it seemed like he had forgotten I was even there. But then he spoke again, his voice softer, almost as if he was talking to himself. I never expected this, he said, almost to no one in particular. I've lived for centuries, seen countless faces, yet none have ever done what you just did. His tone carried a hint of something I couldn't place, perhaps admiration, or maybe something darker. I watched him, unsure of what he was trying to convey. What was it about me that intrigued him so? He had all the power, all the control. I was just a waitress, an insignificant speck in his world. Yet somehow, my actions had made a difference. I'm not who you think I am, he said, turning back toward me, his expression unreadable. I'm not just a man. I'm something far older, far more dangerous than you can imagine. I didn't know what to say to that. His words sent a cold shiver down my spine. I had felt something was off the moment I laid eyes on him, but I had never imagined he could be anything other than a powerful businessman or a wealthy CEO. Now, he was telling me that he was something much more, something I couldn't comprehend. He took a step closer, and I instinctively took a breath, trying to steady myself. His presence was overwhelming, and I felt as if I was being pulled into his orbit, helpless to resist. You've seen too much now, he said, his voice steady but firm. And for that, I cannot let you go. Not yet. I stared at him, my heart racing. What did he mean by that? Was I in danger? Was I supposed to leave? I wasn't sure, but all I knew was that I was caught in his web, and there was no escaping it. You saved my life, he continued, his voice softening ever so slightly. And now, I'm going to save yours. His words hung in the air, and I felt the weight of them sink into my chest. I didn't know what he meant by that either, but somehow, I knew that whatever was about to happen would change everything. There was no going back. Not anymore. You'll stay with me tonight, he said, his gaze never leaving mine. And tomorrow, we'll see where this path leads. I wanted to protest, to say that I needed to leave, to go home. But when I opened my mouth, the words didn't come. Instead, I just nodded, unsure of what to expect next. The Vampire King had just changed the course of my life, and there was no telling where it would take me. I sat in the lavish guest room of the Vampire King's estate, still trying to process everything that had happened. The bed before me was enormous, the linen so soft and pristine that they almost seemed like something out of a dream. The room itself was magnificent, with dark wood furniture, golden fixtures, and velvet curtains that blocked out the light, casting the room in a perpetual twilight. Despite the luxury around me, a sense of unease settled deep in my stomach. I hadn't asked for this. I didn't want to be here. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend the situation I had found myself in. I had been brought to this estate after the king's cryptic words, "You'll stay with me tonight." What was I doing here? Was he going to imprison me? Did he intend to make me his prisoner in some twisted game? The door opened slowly, and I looked up, my heart pounding in my chest. The Vampire King stepped into the room, his presence filling the space with an intensity that made my breath catch. His eyes, those deep amber eyes, locked onto mine. "You didn't have to save me," he said softly, his voice surprisingly gentle, though the weight of his words still held a certain power. "But you did." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? I didn't want to save you seemed like the wrong thing to say. And yet, I didn't know why I did it was the truth, but it sounded so weak. The king studied me for a moment, his gaze never wavering. It was almost as if he was searching for something in my eyes, something he wanted to uncover. "I've been around for a long time," he continued, walking toward the window, his voice more thoughtful now. "Longer than you can possibly imagine. And in all that time, I've seen countless people, thousands, maybe even millions. But not one of them has ever done what you did. I didn't know what to say. He wasn't just some powerful man or a wealthy CEO. He was something far older, far more dangerous. And yet, despite all that power, he seemed intrigued by me, a simple waitress who had no business being in his world. I didn't know who you were, I finally said, finding my voice. I didn't know anything. I just acted. Yes, he replied, turning to face me again. That's what makes you different. His words hung in the air between us, thick with meaning. You acted without knowing anything about me. Most people, even if they saw the danger, would hesitate, would freeze. But not you. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, unsure of where this conversation was going. I wasn't trying to be brave, I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. I just couldn't stand to watch someone get hurt. The king's lips curled into a faint smile, though his eyes remained serious. That's what makes you dangerous, he said, his tone almost amused. You see something, and you act without thinking of the consequences. I couldn't tell if he was complimenting me or threatening me. I was beginning to feel like I had stepped into a world where nothing made sense, a world where every action had a consequence I couldn't begin to understand. You're wrong, I said, suddenly finding my courage. I didn't know what I was getting into. I still don't. The king studied me for a long moment before he spoke again, his voice softer. No one does, he said quietly. No one understands what it means to be in my world. Not until it's too late. A chill ran down my spine as his words sank in. What was he saying? Was I already in too deep? Was there no way out? He stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back. There was something in his eyes, something dark, something that made me feel small, insignificant, and yet captivated. You're in my debt now, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. You saved my life, and now you must stay. I can't allow you to leave. Not yet. Panic surged through me. Stay? Leave? What did he mean by that? I wanted to run, to escape. But somehow, I didn't want to leave either. What was this pull I felt toward him? Why was I drawn to this man who clearly had no limits to his power, no regard for human life? The king's eyes narrowed slightly, as though sensing my internal struggle. You're afraid of me, he said, his voice steady. And you should be. I didn't say anything. What could I say? I was afraid, but at the same time, I was drawn to him, like a moth to a flame. But you won't run, he continued, taking another step toward me. Because deep down, you want to know more. You want to understand why you're here, why you saved me. He was right. I didn't want to understand. But I was terrified of the answers I might find. Why me? I whispered, my voice trembling. Why did you bring me here? He paused, his gaze softening ever so slightly. Because you're different, he said, almost to himself. And in my world, different means something. I didn't know what to make of his words, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer just a waitress. I had crossed into a world I couldn't escape, and the Vampire King had made sure of it. I couldn't escape the feeling that everything had changed, that my life was now under the control of this man, the Vampire King. His words kept echoing in my mind. You're in my debt now. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I could feel the weight of it, pressing down on me like a suffocating force. I had saved his life, but now, he had me exactly where he wanted me. He had power over me, and he knew it. The king stood near the door, his back to me as he stared into the darkness of the night outside. The soft hum of the city below drifted up into the room, but it felt so distant, so insignificant. In this moment, I was far from the life I knew. He turned toward me, and I felt my heart skip a beat. His gaze was intense, his amber eyes like a magnet, pulling me in. You think you're afraid of me, he said, his voice calm, yet chilling. But what you don't understand is that you're more afraid of yourself. You're afraid of what you could become in my world. I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out. What did he mean? What was I becoming? The thought of being caught up in this world, in his world, terrified me, but at the same time, I couldn't deny that I was drawn to it, drawn to him. The king took a few steps toward me, his presence commanding, almost suffocating. You're curious, he continued, his voice softer now. You want to know more. But let me warn you, curiosity is dangerous in my world. It can get you killed. My breath hitched. The danger of his words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and menacing. But despite everything, despite the fear that twisted inside me, I couldn't pull away. Why was I still here? Why am I still here? I asked before I could stop myself. The question was out before I could think it through, but I needed to know. Why was I still trapped in this world that I had no place in? Because you're not ready to leave, the king said simply. You think you're just a waitress, a regular person with no ties to my world. But you're wrong. You've crossed into a world where power rules everything. And now, you're part of it whether you like it or not. He moved closer, and I instinctively backed away, only to stop when I hit the back of the chair. There was nowhere to go. I didn't ask for this, I whispered, my voice shaking. I didn't ask to be here. No one asks for this life, the king replied, his voice filled with a strange kind of sadness. But sometimes, life chooses you. And when it does, you don't get to walk away. He was so close now that I could feel the heat radiating off of him. His presence was overwhelming, his power so palpable that it made my heart race. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I've already told you, he said. You're here to stay? For now. He stepped back slightly, as if giving me space to breathe, but his eyes never left mine. But it's not just about staying. It's about what you can become. My heart skipped a beat. Become what? I asked, my throat dry. You'll understand in time, he said, his tone almost cryptic. But you're not ready for that yet. There was something in his words that unsettled me, something I couldn't quite grasp. What was he trying to say? What was I supposed to become? My mind raced, but before I could ask another question, he turned toward the door. For now, you'll stay here, he said. And when the time is right, I'll show you what it truly means to be part of my world. I watched him, still processing the weight of his words, the gravity of everything he had said. He was a vampire king, ancient, powerful, and dangerous. And I was standing here, a mere human, caught in the web of his world. I had saved his life, but now I was bound to him, tied to a destiny I didn't understand. The thought should have terrified me, and yet, something about it kept pulling me in, a magnetic force that I couldn't resist. He was right. I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. There was something about him, about this world, that I needed to know. But at what cost? As the king turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever happened next, I knew I was in deeper than I ever thought possible. And now, I had no choice but to follow where this path led, no matter how dangerous it might be. I sat in the large, opulent room, the silence surrounding me almost oppressive. The king had left, his presence lingering like a shadow. My mind kept replaying his words over and over. You're not ready for that yet. What did that mean? What was I supposed to become? And why had I felt this strange pull toward him, this magnetic force that kept me from leaving? My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to process everything. I was in a world so different from my own, a world where power, danger, and ancient secrets ruled. I had come here simply to do my job, a waitress in a fancy restaurant, and now, somehow, I was entangled in the life of the vampire king. It didn't seem real, yet here I was, stuck in a world I didn't understand. The door to the room opened slowly, and I stood up instinctively, my heart racing again. There he was, standing in the doorway. The vampire king. His presence was undeniable, his aura commanding. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. You're still here, he said, his voice low and almost amused. I didn't know how to respond. What could I say? I had no choice but to stay. I didn't leave, I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. You didn't want me to, did you? He didn't answer right away, just stared at me, his amber eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. There was something about the way he looked at me, something that made my stomach churn and my pulse race at the same time. No, he said after a long pause. I didn't. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. What now? I asked, unable to keep the uncertainty out of my voice. What was he going to do with me now? The king moved toward me, his steps measured and deliberate. Now, you start learning, he said, his voice growing more serious. About my world. About me. The words sent a chill down my spine. I don't know anything about your world, I said, shaking my head. And I don't know if I want to. The king stopped in front of me, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. You've already seen too much, he said softly. It's too late to turn back now. I felt a jolt of panic surge through me. What did he mean by that? What do you want from me? I asked, my voice trembling. The king didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand gently on my shoulder, his touch sending a shock through my body. "I want you to understand," he said, his voice quieter now. "I want you to understand the power that comes with knowing who I am. The power you can't walk away from." I felt my breath catch in my throat. Power? The king was powerful, that much was clear, but what did he mean by me understanding it? "I don't understand," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. "How can I possibly understand something like that?" The king's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You will," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "In time." I wanted to argue, to tell him I didn't want to be a part of his world, but something in his gaze stopped me. There was no room for resistance in his eyes, no space for rebellion. It was as if the very idea of questioning him was futile. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "You're mine now." My heart skipped a beat. What did he mean by that? Was he claiming ownership over me? A cold shiver ran down my spine at the thought. But even as fear gripped me, I felt something else, something unexpected. A strange sense of curiosity, of wanting to understand him and his world, despite everything. "I'll teach you," he continued, his voice softer now. "I'll show you what you need to know. But first, you need to accept it. You need to accept that this is your reality now." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died in my throat. How could I accept something like this? How could I accept being thrust into a world I knew nothing about? A world where danger lurked around every corner, and the stakes were higher than I could imagine. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized something. I had already accepted it. Without realizing it, I had already stepped into this world, and there was no going back. The king's hand slid from my shoulder, and he took a step back. "Get some rest," he said. "You'll need your strength for what's coming." I didn't understand what he meant, but I nodded, my mind still spinning. As he left the room, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. Whatever was coming, whatever path I was about to walk down, I was already caught in it. And there was no turning back now. I woke up the next morning with a start, the events of last night still fresh in my mind. I could hear the distant hum of the city outside the windows, but inside the room, there was an eerie stillness. The Vampire King had told me to rest, and while I had tried to sleep, my mind had been too active. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, felt the weight of his gaze on me. I couldn't escape the strange connection that had formed between us, one that made no sense. He was powerful, dangerous, and everything in my life now seemed so insignificant in comparison. But why did I feel this pull toward him? Why was I so compelled to understand him, even though I knew he was not someone I could ever truly understand? I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear my thoughts. I had to focus. I had no idea what today would bring, but I knew one thing. There was no way out. The door opened without warning, and I jumped slightly, my heart racing. The king stepped in, as calm and collected as ever. "You're awake," he said, his voice as smooth as velvet. "Good. We have work to do." I didn't speak, just nodded. My throat felt dry, like I had forgotten how to speak. It was hard to keep up with the whirlwind of emotions and confusion that seemed to follow him everywhere. "What do we need to do?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse. The king's gaze softened slightly, though his expression remained unreadable. "You're going to learn. About who I am. About what I do. And about what you are now part of." His words sent a chill down my spine. "What am I part of?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The king took a few steps toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. "You saved me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And because of that, you've been pulled into my world. There's no turning back now." The words felt like a sentence, like I had no choice in the matter. He was right. I was already deep in this world, and I couldn't undo what I had done. But why did I feel this strange sense of purpose now? "I'm not ready for this," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." The king didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence almost overwhelming. "You'll learn. It's not about being ready. It's about survival. In my world, you either adapt or you die." His words were harsh, but there was something in his voice that made me shiver. Maybe it was the way he said them, as if they were a fact of life. Something I had to accept. "How do I survive?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The king's lips twitched in what could have been a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You start by understanding power," he said. The kind of power that controls everything. The power that keeps you alive. I felt a knot form in my stomach. This wasn't just about being a part of his world. This was about survival, about learning to navigate a world I didn't understand. The king studied me for a long moment, as if assessing whether I was truly ready for what was to come. You're different, he said softly. Most people would be terrified, ready to flee the moment they understood the danger. But not you. You're still here. And that's what makes you interesting. I'm not interested in power, I said quickly, my voice shaking. I just want to go back to my life. The king's expression hardened. You can't. Your life is gone. You're in mine now. The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. What had I done? I had stepped into something far bigger than I could handle, and now there was no going back. You're part of something much bigger than you realize, he said, his voice calm, but filled with an underlying threat. And if you want to survive, you'll learn to understand the rules. The king's words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. He was right. There was no escaping this. I had crossed a line, and now I had to face the consequences. I was part of his world, whether I wanted to be or not. I had saved his life, and now I had to navigate a world of power, danger, and secrets. There was no way out. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely audible. The king stepped back, his posture relaxed, as if this was all part of some grand plan. Now we begin. I'll show you what it means to be part of my world. You'll see the power, the influence, and you'll learn what it takes to survive. His words left a bitter taste in my mouth. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew one thing. There was no turning back. I was in this now, whether I liked it or not. I stood there, trying to absorb everything the Vampire King had said. His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. You're part of something much bigger than you realize. What did that even mean? How had I, a simple waitress, been dragged into a world of power, darkness, and ancient secrets? I felt like a leaf caught in a storm, unable to control where it was blowing, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The king stood before me, his cold eyes never leaving mine, as if studying me, weighing me like a delicate object he intended to keep for himself. The silence stretched on, thick with tension. He was waiting for something. I wasn't sure what he expected from me, but I knew one thing. I wasn't leaving. There was no escape. The realization sank in slowly, like a stone sinking to the bottom of the ocean. I was stuck in his world. I couldn't go back to my old life, to the simple routine of working at the restaurant. All of that was gone now. This was my reality, and there was no turning back. The king stepped closer, and I felt a sharp breath catch in my throat. His presence was overwhelming, like a force of nature, impossible to ignore. You're afraid, he said, his voice smooth and low, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. And you should be. The words hit me like a punch, and I flinched involuntarily. I couldn't deny it. I was terrified, but there was something else there, something that I didn't understand. The more I resisted, the more curious I became about the world he was offering me, or rather, the world I had no choice but to enter. What happens now? I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling more than I intended. What do I do? The king's eyes softened just a fraction, but the intensity was still there, lurking beneath the surface. You start by understanding the rules, he said. The rules of power, of survival. And you learn to navigate them. I will teach you. I didn't respond, but I could feel my heart race at the thought. He was going to teach me? The idea seemed absurd, yet I couldn't deny that part of me was intrigued. This world was foreign to me, and I had no idea what I was getting into, but the king's words carried weight. If I wanted to survive, I had to learn. It was the only option. You don't need to speak, he continued, as if reading my mind. I know what you're thinking. You're terrified, and you should be, but you're also curious. That's why you're still here. He was right. Despite the fear, there was something deep inside me that wanted to know more. I wanted to understand the power he wielded, the world he lived in, but I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. What will happen to me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The king studied me for a long moment, his gaze intense. What happens to you? He repeated, as though tasting the words. You'll learn, and you'll grow stronger. But only if you choose to. I looked at him, still trying to process his words. Was this some kind of test? What did he want from me? Why had he brought me into his world in the first place? You have two choices, he said, his voice steady. You can resist, and I'll leave you to your own devices. Or you can embrace what I offer, and I'll show you everything. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't fathom what he was offering, but I knew one thing. I had already stepped into something I couldn't undo. He was right. There was no going back. I had crossed a line, and now I was part of his world, whether I liked it or not. I was in too deep. I choose to learn, I said, my voice trembling but firm. It felt like the only choice I had left. The king's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. Wise decision, he said. You'll need to be strong if you're going to survive here. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted quietly. I'm not strong. The king's expression softened for a moment, just a fraction, before it turned cold again. You will be, he said. I'll make sure of it. But it's up to you to find your own strength. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed him. Could I really find the strength to survive in this world? Or would I be swallowed up by the darkness? I didn't know. But I knew one thing for sure. I was in this now, and there was no turning back. What do I need to do? I asked, my voice steadying a little. The king looked at me, his expression unreadable. You'll start by meeting the others. You'll need to understand who you're dealing with. I'll introduce you to those who can help you, and those who will try to destroy you. I swallowed hard. Destroy me? The thought was almost too much to bear, but I knew it was true. In this world, there was no room for weakness. I had to be strong, or I would be crushed. Stay close, the king said, his voice low, almost a command. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone but me. I nodded, unsure of what was to come next. But I couldn't deny that the fear inside me had started to fade, replaced by something else. Curiosity. I wanted to know more, even if it terrified me. The king turned and walked toward the door, pausing just before he left. Get ready, he said. This is just the beginning. And with that, he was gone, leaving me to prepare for whatever would come next. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest as the Vampire King's words echoed in my mind. This is just the beginning. The weight of his statement settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had no idea what was coming, but I knew I was in over my head. The king had promised to show me the ropes, to teach me how to survive in his world. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was walking into a storm I couldn't escape. He had warned me about the dangers, about the power that governed everything here, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. The door creaked open again, and I turned quickly, my breath catching in my throat. There he was again, the king, standing in the doorway with his usual calm demeanor. His piercing amber eyes fixed on me, and for a moment, I felt like I was being examined under a microscope. Are you ready? He asked, his voice low and steady. I didn't know what to say. Ready for what? Everything had changed so quickly, and I was struggling to keep up. I nodded slowly, unsure of what else to do. I guess I don't have a choice, I said quietly. The king's lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. No, you don't, he said simply. But I need you to understand one thing. This is not a game. People in this world die every day, and if you're not careful, you'll be one of them. His words sent a chill through me, but I couldn't back down now. I had already made my choice by staying, and there was no going back. What do I need to do? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The king stepped further into the room, his presence filling the space, making the air feel heavy. You'll meet the others, he said, his voice almost casual, as if talking about something as simple as meeting new neighbors. You'll meet those who want to help you, and those who will try to kill you. The words hit me like a punch, and I felt my stomach churn. Kill me? I hadn't realized how much danger I was in until now. You're not the only one who's been dragged into this world, the king continued, his eyes locking onto mine. But you're one of the few who has a chance to survive. That's why I'm going to train you. He moved closer, stopping just in front of me. You'll learn about power, about influence, and about how to make people listen when you speak. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing heart. And what happens if I can't learn? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The king's expression darkened, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a sharp, dangerous edge that made me take a step back. If you can't learn, he said, his voice low and dangerous, then you're dead. This world doesn't tolerate weakness. My stomach twisted, and I felt the weight of his words sink in. The king wasn't just teaching me for the sake of it. He was giving me a choice, learn or die. I had no intention of dying, but what did survival really mean in this world? The king took a step back, his gaze never leaving me. "You'll start tomorrow," he said, his voice final. "Prepare yourself. And remember, trust no one but me." I nodded, though part of me still didn't believe what I was hearing. Trust no one? Was I really ready for this? Was I ready to step into a world where everyone had an agenda, and where power was the only thing that mattered? "You'll meet some of my closest allies," the king continued. "But don't be fooled by their smiles. They all want something from you, and you'll need to decide whether you're willing to give it to them." His words were like a warning, and I couldn't help but feel the gravity of the situation. "Why me?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Why am I here? Why did you save me?" The king's eyes softened just for a moment, and I saw something flicker in his gaze. "Because you're different," he said, his voice quiet, almost thoughtful. "You act without thinking, and that's rare in a world like this. People here are afraid to act. But you're not. That's why you're still alive." I didn't know whether to take that as a compliment or a warning, but before I could respond, he turned away, walking toward the door. "Get some rest," he said over his shoulder. "Tomorrow, you begin your training, and I expect you to be ready." With that, he was gone, leaving me standing there in the silence of the room. I was left with my thoughts, with the weight of everything I had just learned. Tomorrow. The word hung in the air, full of promises and dangers I wasn't ready for. But there was no turning back now. Whatever this world was, whatever the king had planned for me, I had no choice but to face it. And I had to do it alone. I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps outside the door, followed by a gentle knock. My heart raced as I glanced at the clock. Dawn had barely broken, and yet the king was already starting the day. I had no idea what to expect, but one thing was clear. Nothing about this life was going to be easy. I got out of bed and moved toward the door, my body still heavy with sleep, but my mind wide awake. As I opened it, the king stood there, his usual cold expression in place, though I noticed a faint glint of something else in his eyes. "Ready?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. I nodded, feeling the weight of the words settle in my chest. Was I ready for this? For whatever he had planned for me today? I wasn't sure, but there was no turning back now. I stepped out of the room and followed him down a long hallway, my footsteps echoing in the vast, empty mansion. The walls were lined with portraits of people I didn't recognize, their eyes seemingly watching me as I passed. It was as if the very walls of the mansion were alive with secrets I was about to uncover. We reached a large, ornate door at the end of the hallway, and the king stopped in front of it. He turned to me, his eyes scanning my face as if measuring me, gauging my readiness. "This is where it begins," he said, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable intensity. He opened the door, revealing a room unlike anything I had ever seen. The space was large and cavernous, filled with rows of bookshelves, each stacked high with ancient-looking tomes. There were tables covered with maps, strange artifacts, and old scrolls, all adding to the atmosphere of mystery and power that radiated from the room. At the center of it all stood a large wooden table, its surface cluttered with various items I couldn't quite make out. "This is where you'll learn," the king said, stepping inside. "Everything you need to survive in my world is here. The knowledge, the history, the power, everything." I stood still for a moment, taking in the room, my mind racing. This was it. The beginning of something I wasn't sure I could handle, yet couldn't escape from. The king gestured for me to follow him, and I stepped inside, my heart thudding in my chest. "There's a lot to learn," he said, his voice low and commanding. "But you must understand one thing above all else. Power is everything. Without it, you are nothing. And the moment you forget that, you'll be destroyed." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. I nodded, my mind struggling to comprehend the weight of his words. "Where do we start?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The king's gaze flickered to one of the bookshelves, and he walked toward it. He pulled down a thick, leather-bound book and placed it on the table. "This," he said, tapping the cover, "is the foundation of everything. The history of our kind. The history of power." He opened the book, revealing pages filled with strange symbols and text I couldn't read. "This is what you need to understand first," he continued. "Our world is ancient. It's built on rules, and those who understand those rules control everything. You will learn those rules, or you will fail." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle on me. The world he was talking about was nothing like the one I knew. And yet, here I was, forced to learn its rules, whether I liked it or not. What if I can't learn fast enough? I asked, my voice trembling. What happens then? The king turned to face me, his expression unreadable. Then you die, he said flatly. It's as simple as that. But I'm giving you the chance to survive. You have to prove you're worth the effort. The coldness in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. I was in over my head. This wasn't just some test or training session. This was survival. His world was unforgiving, and if I couldn't keep up, I would be discarded like everyone else who had failed before me. I looked at the book in front of me, the strange symbols mocking me as I tried to make sense of them. I had no idea what I was looking at, no idea how any of this worked. But one thing was clear, I had to learn. How do I learn this? I asked, my voice steady despite the fear twisting in my gut. The king's lips curled into a small smile, though there was no warmth in it. You learn by doing, he said. I'm going to show you what happens when you cross the line between ignorance and knowledge. You'll either sink or swim. He stepped closer, his voice soft but filled with authority. I don't expect you to understand everything right away, but you will learn, and you will adapt. That's the only way to survive. The weight of his words settled over me, and I felt a mixture of fear and determination rising in my chest. I had no choice but to go forward. There was no turning back now. Are you ready? He asked, his gaze never leaving mine. I took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, I said, the word feeling like a promise. Whatever was coming next, I had to face it. I had to survive. And if I had to fight my way through this world, I would. The king's eyes seemed to gleam with approval. Good, he said, turning back to the table. Let's begin. I sat in the grand study, the thick, ancient book in front of me feeling like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. The vampire king had left me here alone to begin my training, surrounded by artifacts and texts I couldn't comprehend. The world I was now a part of felt so far removed from everything I had ever known, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was drowning in it. The king had told me to prepare, that today was the day I would begin to understand power, but it felt like I was just being thrown into the deep end without any idea how to swim. I opened the book, running my fingers over the old pages, trying to make sense of the strange symbols and texts that seemed so foreign to me. I couldn't even read the language, let alone understand what it meant. Frustration began to bubble up inside me. I had no idea how I was supposed to learn all of this. It wasn't just the language, it was everything. The power, the influence, the danger, none of it made sense. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, too terrified to take the leap, but knowing that I had no choice but to fall. The sound of footsteps broke my thoughts, and I looked up to see the king standing in the doorway. He watched me for a moment, his eyes piercing, as if reading me. How are you doing? He asked, his tone casual, though there was a hint of something more behind it. I hesitated before answering. I'm trying, I said, my voice steady but filled with doubt. But this? I don't understand any of it. The king's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. That's the point, he said, his voice low and filled with authority. You're not supposed to understand it all at once. That's how power works. It's never easy. You have to work for it, fight for it. The knowledge will come, but it takes time. And you have to trust that you'll be able to handle it when it does. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had always thought power was something that just happened, that people were either born with it or they weren't. But now, I was starting to understand that it was something you had to earn, something you had to struggle for. You think you can't do it, he continued, stepping further into the room. But you're wrong. You're stronger than you realize. And you'll learn to tap into that strength. It's just a matter of time. I didn't say anything. How could I argue with him? He was right. I was here because I had acted when others would have frozen. But that wasn't enough. I needed to learn everything else, the rules of his world, how to survive, how to gain the kind of power he had. The king walked over to the table and picked up another book, a smaller one this time. He placed it in front of me and opened it to a page filled with symbols I could barely recognize. This is where we start, he said, his tone more serious now. This is the foundation of everything. The first lesson. I looked at the page in confusion, the symbols seeming to swirl in front of my eyes. What is this? I asked, my voice shaky. The king's eyes softened just slightly. This is the language of power, he said. It's not just words. It's a way of thinking, a way of seeing the world. It's how you'll begin to understand the balance of power, how you'll learn to influence those around you. My mind raced as I stared at the strange symbols. I didn't know if I could do this, but I had no choice. I had to try. Start by learning the symbols, the king said, his voice firm. Each one represents something. A person, an object, a concept. The more you understand these symbols, the more you'll understand how to control the world around you. You'll learn to use them to your advantage. I nodded slowly, though I still wasn't sure how any of this was going to work. How could a language like this help me? How could these symbols possibly give me the power to survive in this world? The king seemed to sense my doubt, and he stepped closer, placing his hand on the book. This is how it starts, he said quietly. It's not about brute strength. It's about control, influence, manipulation. You have to understand that power isn't always physical. Sometimes it's mental. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you'll be able to start changing the way people see you. I felt a chill run down my spine at his words. Influence, manipulation. Was that really the kind of world I was entering? But I had no choice. If I wanted to survive, I had to adapt. I had to learn. Start with the basics, he continued. Learn the symbols. Learn the rules. Once you understand them, we can move on to the next step. And trust me, you'll need every bit of knowledge you can get. I stared at the page again, my mind racing. I didn't know how to do this, but the king was right. This was the only way forward. I had no choice but to learn. I had no choice but to embrace this new life, this new reality. The king had warned me that it would be hard, that I would face dangers beyond my understanding. But he also said that I was strong enough to handle it. And now, I had to believe him. With a deep breath, I began to study the symbols, determined to learn whatever I could. Whatever it took, I would survive. This was just the beginning, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. I spent the following days immersed in the strange symbols, the language of power that the king had shown me. The book he had given me became my lifeline, my only connection to understanding the world around me. It felt like I was learning an entirely new way of thinking. Each symbol on the page held a deeper meaning, representing not just objects or concepts, but forces that shaped everything. As the king had said, power wasn't just about brute strength. It was about understanding, control, and influence. I could feel my mind expanding, trying to wrap itself around the knowledge that seemed so alien, so complex. Every time I thought I understood one piece, another layer of depth was added, and I found myself lost again. The king didn't offer me comfort. He didn't hold my hand through the process. Instead, he pushed me harder, demanding more each day. You're making progress, but not enough, he would say, his cold eyes never showing any approval. You're too slow. You need to understand that time is not a luxury we have. He kept me in this room for hours every day, forcing me to read the ancient texts, to study the intricate details of power, influence, and manipulation. Sometimes he would watch me from the doorway, his presence heavy and unyielding, and I would feel his gaze bore into me like a judgment. I knew I couldn't afford to fail, but every time I thought I had grasped the concept, the king would throw another challenge my way. Do you understand how the power shifts in this world? He asked one evening, after I had spent hours on a particularly difficult passage. I looked up at him, feeling the weight of his words. Not fully, I admitted, but I'm trying. The king stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Trying is not enough, he said, his voice steady, but there was an underlying edge to it. You must understand that power is not static. It shifts. It moves, like the tide. And the one who controls the tide controls everything. I stared at him, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. Power moved like the tide? It was hard to imagine, but I could see the truth in it. Everything in this world was about control, about managing the ebb and flow of influence. You're learning, he continued. But the real challenge comes when you realize that no one, no matter how powerful, can control everything. That's when the game changes. The moment you think you have it all figured out is the moment you lose it. His words echoed in my mind long after he left, and I found myself staring at the pages of the book again, trying to understand the deeper meaning behind his lessons. The king wasn't just teaching me the mechanics of power. He was teaching me the philosophy behind it, how to bend the rules, how to survive in a world where survival wasn't guaranteed. I spent the next few days trying to process everything. I would study the symbols, make connections, and then, just as I thought I understood, the king would come in with another lesson, another challenge. You're learning, but you're not there yet, he would say. You need to understand that the rules are only part of it. You need to understand the people who make the rules. He would then introduce me to others, figures of power, some with dark intentions, others with their own agendas. I realized quickly that in this world, no one could be trusted. Every person had their own goals, their own motivations, and I had to figure out who was friend and who was foe. But that was the real challenge. It wasn't just about learning the symbols and mastering the language of power. It was about understanding the people who used that power. Each interaction, each conversation was a test, and I was failing miserably. One evening, after another long day of study, the king stood before me, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp as ever. You're still too naive, he said. You think you can trust people. You think you can change things by following the rules. But the truth is, the rules are only a tool. The real power comes from bending them, from breaking them when necessary. I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. The king's words were harsh, but there was an undeniable truth to them. I was still too green, too trusting. I had to stop thinking of this world as something I could change with kindness or fairness. In this world, it was kill or be killed, manipulate or be manipulated. You need to understand, the king continued, his voice calm but filled with authority. There is no one you can trust here. Not even me. The sooner you realize that, the better. My stomach twisted at his words. He was right. The more I learned, the more I realized that trust had no place here. Everyone was playing a game, and the only way to survive was to play by their rules, or break them when necessary. The king turned and walked to the door, pausing before he left. You'll meet the others tomorrow, he said. They'll test you. Don't disappoint me. And with that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. I was learning, but I was still so far from understanding this world. I had no idea who I could trust, but one thing was clear. I couldn't trust anyone, not even the king. I stood in front of the large, imposing doors of the grand hall, the weight of the last few weeks settling on my shoulders. I had learned so much, far more than I ever thought I could in such a short period of time. But I had also changed. The world I had entered was far darker and more complex than I could have ever imagined, and I had become a part of it. There was no going back, no escaping it. I had learned the language of power, the rules that governed this world, and how to bend them to my will. The king had shown me what it meant to survive, and I had learned. But I knew the hardest part was yet to come. The king had introduced me to his allies, powerful figures who played the game just as he did. They were all dangerous, each one with their own hidden agendas, but each also offering me the knowledge I needed to survive. I had learned that trust had no place here. I had to use them, just as they would use me. I had to be careful, calculating, always thinking 2 steps ahead. My lessons with the king had been brutal, his expectations high, but they had forged something inside me, a determination, a will to succeed no matter the cost. I could feel the power growing inside me, a quiet force waiting to be unleashed. But with that power came a dangerous realization. I was becoming like them. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. The king had warned me that this world would change me, that it would take everything from me. I had thought he was just being dramatic, but now, standing here on the threshold of something unknown, I wasn't so sure. I felt his presence behind me before I heard him. The king. He had been watching me, always watching. I turned to face him, my heart still pounding in my chest. His expression was unreadable as always, but there was something in his eyes, something that told me the moment had arrived. Are you ready? He asked, his voice low and steady. I swallowed, trying to steady my breath. I'm ready, I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. The king nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Good. This is where it all begins, he said. You've learned what you needed to survive, but now you must prove you can thrive. The game is not over. In fact, it's just beginning. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what was to come. I had learned the rules, but I had yet to face the true test. I had to prove myself, not just to the king, but to everyone who would be watching me now. The hall doors opened. Before me, revealing a large gathering. The faces of the powerful were all around, some familiar, some new. The tension in the air was thick, and I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, sizing me up. The king stepped beside me, his presence a constant reminder of the power he held. This is your moment, he said, his voice soft but commanding. "Do not disappoint me." I nodded, though inside I was terrified. This was it. The culmination of everything I had learned. The training, the manipulation, the power. It was time to put it all into action. I walked forward, my steps confident, but my mind racing. Every person in the room had the potential to be an ally or an enemy, and I had to figure out which was which. The king's allies, the other power players in the room, were watching me closely. They wanted to see if I had what it took to belong in this world. There was no room for weakness, no room for hesitation. I had to make my move, to prove I could survive, to prove I could control my own fate. As I reached the center of the room, the king's voice rang out. "This is your test," he said, his tone carrying across the room. "Prove your worth. Show them what you can do." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and looked around at the people in front of me. Each one was a potential threat, but also a potential ally. The game was in motion, and I had to play it to win. I could feel the power inside me, the strength I had gained over the past weeks, and I knew that this moment would define everything. I raised my head, meeting the gazes of those around me, and felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I was ready. This was my moment, and I would not let it slip away. I had survived the training, I had learned the rules, and now I had to prove that I could thrive in this world. There was no turning back. I was no longer just a waitress in a restaurant. I was someone to be reckoned with. The king had shown me the way, but now it was up to me to walk it. And I would, no matter the cost. I have a story that delves deep into the mysterious and dark world of vampires, exploring a journey full of power, danger, and complex relationships. This tale is filled with intrigue, as our protagonist navigates through a world where trust is scarce and power is everything. The protagonist starts as an ordinary individual, thrust into the dangerous world of vampires, where survival depends on knowledge, manipulation, and control. Throughout the story, the protagonist learns about ancient powers, the rules of influence, and the harsh reality of their new life. From their first encounter with the Vampire King to the intense training and challenges they face, the narrative unfolds to reveal the transformation of an ordinary person into someone who understands the darker aspects of power and survival. The gripping tension between the protagonist and the Vampire King keeps the audience hooked, especially as they navigate the blurred lines between trust and betrayal in vampire stories. As the protagonist's strength grows, so does the realization that survival is not just about learning the rules, but about mastering the manipulation of power. This story showcases the captivating dynamics and the ever-changing, unpredictable nature of vampire stories, where the price of power is steep and the cost of failure is deadly. With each challenge, the protagonist moves closer to becoming a part of this dark world, but also risks losing their humanity along the way. As the story reaches its climax, the protagonist must face their ultimate test, proving they have what it takes to survive in a world ruled by the powerful and ruthless, where everything comes at a price. If you enjoy thrilling, action-packed vampire stories with complex characters and intense emotional stakes, this is the perfect narrative to immerse yourself in.